Let's get started in Photoshop. So I have an image already open, but wanted to go over just opening files, saving files, closing files, and then just a little bit of a introduction to the interface, the tools and panels that we see. So to begin with, to open a file, we would go to File and New, or Control N is the shortcut there. So when I open a new file, what I'm doing is I'm making something brand new. So I have some options for how I want to set up this new document. I can choose to name this right away. If I don't know exactly what I want to name it, I can wait until I save it and then name it at that time. So there are presets here. These are kind of some of the general common use, like US paper would be 8.5 by 11. I have a size here, again, some different sizes, and now because I went into a US paper, it thinks that I'm looking at something for print, so it gave me some options here. I can also just choose to type in a specific dimension, and I can choose to use whatever unit of measurement as well. So I'm going to press my Tab key. Tab is a great key to navigate from one entry in a form or a dialog box to the next. So say I want a 5 by 5, there I go. I can click different units of measurement like I had said. If it's print, you're probably most familiar with inches. You may have heard of picas as well. Pixels is something that you would be dealing with for on-screen digital format. And then any others if you have something specific that you're looking at. The resolution is the pixels per inch. And so if it's going to be something that will be printed, absolutely do not go below 300 pixels per inch. If it's going to be something that will end up in a digital format on a mobile device or on a website, 72 is where you need to be for that. And you can see at this point, it's given me an estimate of a file size. Because of the resolution, our file sizes get really large really fast. The color mode here, this gives me a choice, and mainly, again, thinking about my output, if it's going to be RGB, which is red, green, blue, that's an additive color model, that's for digital. That's for the digital world. CMYK is for print, cyan, magenta, yellow, K meaning key color, which almost always is black. I also have a grayscale, which would be 256 colors. It would be black and white and 254 shades of gray. Bitmap is only black and white. That's a 1 bit. See how it changes to 1 bit here? Very, very small. This is like early day internet where it was just, pixels were on or pixels were off. So very, very low quality. Lab color is something, it's luminosity and then 2 chromatic components. This would be something that potentially more in the photography you would be looking at, not the most common. So RGB and CMYK, probably 90%, that's where you're going to be. The background content, so this is when I make my new document, do I want it to have a solid white background? Or utilizing my background color that I have in my toolbar, or if I want it to be transparent. So I get to choose right away. Now all of these can be changed. So if I mistakenly choose something at this point, I can always go back and change that. Okay, and then there's some advanced pieces here dealing with color profile that's saved with my graphic. So if I click OK right now, there is my new document. And if you do this and you've not used Photoshop too much, probably what's going to happen is you're going to get it tabbed, just like this. So you have 2 tabbed views of multiple files if you have multiple files open. And I'm going to show you that here in a minute. Okay, so that was File and New. File and Open. Okay, so this will allow me to navigate to a specific folder and then choose a specific image to open. And you can see I have a couple of TIFFs in this folder and I have a JPEG. So I'm going to open the TIFF file and open, and there it is. And again, yours may be tabbed because it's a preference. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Now if I chose File and Save, Actually, I haven't done anything to this file yet, so save is grayed out, meaning that it's not available at the moment because, like I said, I didn't do anything to this file yet. Save, though, will just save right over top of whatever that file is. You have to be cautious. I always tell people, save your original and then work off of a copy. You just never know when you may have to go back to that original. Now, save as allows me to change my name and save it as a different type, and also change my location where I want to save it. So you have a lot more options there, and there's some other save options that, again, more advanced Photoshop. All right, so if I just click save, it's going to give me, are you sure you want to replace it? Sure, I'll say yes. And then it gives me, because I'm dealing with a TIFF, it gives me some options. If I were saving this as a JPEG, also would give me some options for compression. That's pretty much what this is telling me as well. TIFF, remember from last week, utilizes an LZW compression. Here it is, which is a lossless, meaning I'm not losing quality. I can choose to not compress this, or I can go into the JPEG, which gives me a little warning, but that's going to allow me to change my quality, and I'm going to lose quality. So I'm just going to choose none because I'm not too concerned at this point with my file size. That's mainly the reason why I'd be looking at compressing it. And I'll just click OK, and there we go. Okay, so that's file and save, or file and save as. Closing, if I click my little X right here, I close this document. Okay, so if I navigate by the tab view here to the one I just made, click X, that document now is closed. I can also, with the active document, go to File and Close, or Control W, that's a nice one to remember. That will close the current document, the document that's visible on top at the moment. If I click my X over here, let me navigate up in the top right, that is going to close Photoshop. That's going to exit. So that's more of what we would say exit. And at the bottom here, Control Q, I always think quit. Control Q, Q for quit, is exit. So that's going to close Photoshop. Now, if you have something open, it may ask you, do you want to save it if you've made changes and not saved it yet? I wouldn't rely on that. So be cautious just by going and closing it all out. You want to make sure you've saved all your files first. Let's go under Edit, and I just want to show you down here towards the bottom, I have Preferences. And Preferences allows me to change my settings to kind of customize Photoshop. So I can choose to go into a specific area, or I can just go to General and actually navigate through. You can see that I have those exact same links or areas right here. And I also can do a Next and a Previous, and it just will walk down that list. So one of the things that I like to change is under Interface. And I tell people, be cautious with this. Don't just go into Preferences and start playing around because you can really mess some things up. This is where you can break it. So one of those being going into Preferences, start playing with memory usage. What might end up happening is you may change a setting, then all of a sudden you get an out of memory error whenever you try to do something in Photoshop, or it'll just freeze up on you. So leave it where it is. Once you become more familiar with your computer and with the software, and you know what you're doing, that would be a time to then start taking a look. Honestly, I don't mess with this at all. I leave it alone. I go into the interface, and this check mark, Open Documents as Tabs, I turn that off. So right now, when you look up here, this was tabbed. When if I were to have this checked, and I think by default that it is checked, then everything I open is going to be up here in a tabbed view. Personally, I don't like that. I like to see things side by side. I might want to make a selection on one document and drag it over to another document. And when they're tabbed, that's very difficult. So I choose to not open them as tabs. The other area that I tend to change under cursors, so the painting cursors, I like to see the brush tip. If you do standard, you're going to see the icon. And if you do precise, you get the crosshair, but you don't know exactly how big your brush is or where you actually are painting. So for the brush tools, I like to see the brush tip. Now for my other cursors, I like to see precise rather than standard. Standard again gives you your icon. And for this one, it might make sense that yet you're probably going to sample up color for this eyedropper tool at the bottom. But some of those other tools that are over here, it's hard to know exactly where you are clicking. What pixel are you on top of? When I have precise, I now get my little target and I know exactly where I am at. So those are the two that I like to change. Now, if you want to change this to become a default with Photoshop so that every time you open Photoshop, it remembers this, do this change in preferences without any documents open. With the document open, it tends to just remember it with that document. So if with no documents open, it will then become a default. So I did it with documents open, and probably will have to go back and do it at some point without any. Okay, so I click OK to get out of that. Photoshop comes with a tool that can be helpful. Now, if some of you are working in an older version of Photoshop, you might see a panel called Mini Bridge, and you may find it when you go under Window and into these areas up here, you might see a Mini Bridge. The newer versions, it actually is gone, but you still have a bridge program, and I just wanted to share quickly what you can do with that. So actually, let me go to my programs here and find it. So I'll open Bridge. It's called Adobe Bridge, BR, a little icon for it. So what this is more of a file management type tool. This is great for photographers who want to flag pictures, who want to do some ratings on pictures. You know, what I use it for is if I'm trying to open up a file and they're all saved as, say, an Illustrator file or all saved as a Photoshop file. It's kind of hard to see the preview of it. So if I go into Bridge, I see the preview of it and it's opening. This is why I don't use it very often, because it's a little slow. I do want to point out you can mess around with this. Of course, you can locate your favorites. You can go to folders. You can do all kinds of searches, like I said, in here. But one of the things, if you have your preview workplace set to essentials, I'll just click on one of these pictures here. I'll click on the peppers. What's super cool about this, especially for those that deal with photography a lot, is that depending on what the camera metadata can store, you will get all of that and see it. So for instance, this one was taken with the camera that didn't save that metadata. Let me just see if I can find one that does. I know that there was some in here. Maybe not. It'll tell me though my ISO and my f-stop, which is pretty cool. These are all just stock photography, so it's not gonna show you. I'm sorry. If you have your own photography though, you might be able to see this. There we go, there's one. So here's where the f-stop on the camera was at 5.6. Gives me a shutter speed, gives me an ISO, and then it also tells me the document size. So here, document JPEG, date created, dimensions, dimensions in pixels, file size, resolution at 300. So you get a whole bunch of information. Now some of the other, I can tell it was taken with the Canon, some and the body number, the serial number of the camera. So if you have a high-end camera, you can go in here and actually some cameras store GPS locations, which is really kind of fun too. So anyway, this is just organization tool. Just wanted to point it out, whether you use it or not. Let's look at the workplace here. So we have up at the top our menu, and that's called the application bar, kind of this whole area up here. So I do have a title, and I'm going to actually pull these off. So now they are floating rather than tabbed. And what I can also do is grab the corner here. You can see my cursor changes to a diagonal arrow, and I'm just going to slide them. I know that I can't see the whole thing right now. I'm going to share how we can alter that. But you can see I like my files floating. This is my title bar, tells me the title, tells me what view percent, tells me what color mode. This is RGB. Okay. So that kind of this whole area, we're talking about the application. Now our work area is right in here. You can see my cursor going around it. My tools. So tools are by default over on the left. You can change all of these around. All of these panels are floating and capable of being moved. I like to view my tools two up. Probably comes from, the very first time I started using Photoshop way back. It was actually Photoshop version 2, which was sometime around 92, 93. This was all it came. And so I kind of, I guess of habit, that's how I like it to look. But you can choose any way you'd like. The tools, getting to know them by using looking at their tool tip. If you rest your tool over top of, or your cursor over top of a tool, you're going to see a tool tip come up. Those are great to start to become familiar with. You're not going to learn them all overnight. You'll start realizing in the next couple weeks that, gosh, I'm using this tool quite a bit. Maybe I should learn that tool tip, that shortcut key. For instance, the marquee tool, the rectangular marquee tool, is an M. I might remember that my type tool is a T. So there's some that are a little bit easier to remember because you're going to use them more. Now, some of the tools also have a dog ear. All right, so that will open up hiding tools or tools that are hidden underneath. And when you select one, that'll become the top visible tool. Okay, so they do change these things around with different versions. So you kind of have to do a little exploring sometimes. Say, well, where'd they put that tool? But anyway, that's something just to start becoming familiar with. And like I said, sometimes we'll use some quick keys from our menu items up here as well. For instance, if I wanted to do a select all, Control A, that's on the PC. Remember, on a Mac, that would be Command. Okay, so we just need to make sure you change that conversion if you're working from a Mac. All right, so the tools, remember, over on the left, and that actually it's called the tool panel. Now over on the right, we see a bunch of other panels, and I'm just going to share with you lightly about these. We're not going to talk in depth at this point with a lot of them. We're going to start pinpointing few out. In fact, next week we talk about layers. But I wanted to share how you can view these in different ways. So actually you can collapse this all the way down to only having icons, which is a little tricky when you're not sure what in the world the icon stands for. I can expand it, okay, and I can collapse it, and I can actually stretch it so I get a name. So it's all customizable. The other thing we can do over here is this is called our panel dock, and I actually can drag these panels out, and I can have them float. Let's just try to. I can have a lot of different views for these panels. Say I want this to be a small thumbnail instead. I can change the size of them. I could drag out, now there are more here, history, and I could snap that underneath and make my own panel dock if it'll do it. There it goes. All right, so I can move these things around. Now all of these panels are listed under window, as well as ones that we don't see at the moment. There are some that are hiding. So the check mark indicates the panels that are open and visible at the moment. Adjustments, it's open, but it's hiding under libraries. Here's adjustments. There is no check mark there because it's not on top. If I check it, there it goes, it pops on top. Okay, so you can explore, play around. You can't break this part because we have a wonderful little option to save workspaces. And a workspace is just the way that our interface looks. I see it here under Window and Workspace, and I also see it over here. It says Essentials. These are also workspaces. So if I'm dealing with typography, it will open or present the panels it feels as though deal with typography. Painting, it'll show me my brushes and swatches and things that are related to painting. Now, if I go back to Essentials, this is how I left it. This is what I was just playing in, and I left it. Guess what? Photoshop will pick up for you. It'll put things away for you. If I do reset, it puts everything back away, nice and neat. And I can also save my own workspaces. In fact, I did a class exercise where I had saved, kind of a mess, but just showing. Actually, I had another monitor, so it's fallen off the edge there. But I had a whole bunch and I just saved it. You know, I can save it and make a new one as well. I could make a new workspace, name it. Say there's a, you know, as you get going with Photoshop, you really like certain tools open, you like it arranged in a certain way, you might want to save that workspace. So I'm going to go back to Essentials to kind of put everything back away nice and neat. A little bit more detail, like I said, next week we're going to talk about layers. Layers are really, it's a powerful piece of Photoshop. In fact, some people say if you can master layers, you've mastered a big chunk of Photoshop. Layers are basically indicate things that are stacked. You can manipulate different components independently. Now with these images, this is just a photo, so of course I only have one layer. But there are many different types of layers that I can do. We'll talk about that next week. Somewhere around 8,000. I've heard infinite a number of layers, basically until your computer crashes. So you can have a lot of layers to the point you don't have to worry about running out of them. So this is something that we will cover in more detail. I wanted to also share one other panel. I happen to know this is the icon for it. This is history. So history is like your undos. Default, you have around 20 history states, which means I can go back back the last 20 things I did. You may have seen that when I was back in preferences here, let's just go to general. And if I next through, maybe saw when I said don't touch this area right here, my history states actually are at 50. So you can bump history states up to 1,000, meaning Photoshop will remember the last 1,000 things that you did. Is it a good idea? Probably not. I would say between 20 and 50 is a good amount. Anything more, you're going to get an out-of-memory error right away. Okay? So mine is at 50. Now the bad thing with history, it's erased when I close my file. So I take my frog here, I do a whole bunch of fun things. Let me just start, I'll just take a paintbrush and just show you what happens if I start painting. There's the brush tool. Cool thing is, if I don't want that brush tool, I click on the last state and it's gone. Or I can go back to it. Okay? So it'll remember 50 of these things I did. But the minute I close this document, even if I save the changes, I close it, I open it, history is gone. So you have to remember that. Last piece here. Hang with me for a few more minutes. I'm going to put my history back away. Zooming. So we have a zoom tool and we have a hand tool. Zoom tool, zoom in. Hold down your Alt or Option, zoom out. Okay? I can drag my window to be a little bit larger here. Now if I zoom in, I can use my hand tool to move things around. It's like putting my hand on a piece of paper, sliding it around. Okay? Now, do I use the hand tool and the zoom tool? Nope. I don't use those two tools at all. Instead, I use some shortcut keys, and I do it automatically. So sometimes I try to tell you guys what I'm doing, but sometimes I do it without even thinking. Now, I do use them. I lied. I do use them for one purpose. Double-clicking on the hand tool will make my window, let's just put this one away too. And you can see I'm dragging them back in their dock. I get a dark and blue outline, puts it right back away. So now I double-clicked on my hand tool and it filled my picture in my window as large as I could get it. Kind of nice. It's at 193% right here. You can see the percentage. If I double-click on the zoom tool, it brings it to a 100% view. So I do use those to quickly get to a certain specific view. I also have a lot of options up here under the view, fit and screen, Control 0, same thing as double clicking on hand, so you get the idea. Now what I use for, there are different ways, but what I use for zoom, I'm going to go back up to another tool because most of the time I'm working with another tool. So say I'm working with this tool, the marquee tool here, and I want to zoom in. What I use is a Control and space bar, or Command and space bar. I'm using that with my left hand, and with my right hand, I'm clicking my mouse to zoom in. To zoom out, I add the Alt key, and you can see my little cursor changes to a minus. So Control Alt Spacebar zooms out. Control Spacebar zooms in. Spacebar by itself gives me my hand tool to move around. Those are really, really great tools to know and start practicing with. It's kind of like you're playing a piano, because your right hand always stays on your mouse and your left hand is doing these quick keys on your keyboard. All right, some people do use Control plus and Control minus. I tend not to, because I have to cross over the keyboard to get to those, and my hands are generally resting over on the left side of the keyboard. So, you know, that just kind of as a personal preference. I know some people, though, that constantly are using the Control plus and Control minus to zoom in and zoom out. Okay. One last piece, I currently have rulers open. Rulers will happen, they'll fall on the left side and the top side. Control R, R for rulers, easy one to remember. Under view, this gives you a lot of extras, a lot of things that you can turn on and turn off. Just remember where there's a check mark, that's indicating that's on right now. So rulers is on. If I actually click the check mark here, rulers will turn off. Okay. So if you're really wanting to know size, dimensions, where you're at, Control R for rulers. All right. So this wraps up the introduction to Photoshop.